Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a culture where horses aren't just animals, they're wings. This is the incredible equestrian heritage of the Uyghurs, a tradition forged over thousands of years. For them, horses meant everything: survival, power, identity. This bond goes way, way back. And these weren't just for fun. They were a way to keep that warrior spirit sharp in times of peace.
Okay, so let's check out some of these amazing sports, born on the Central Asian steppe. First up is Chovgan, a super fast-paced game that's been around since at least the 6th century.
And you can totally see its legacy. The game you're seeing on the left, that's the direct ancestor of modern polo. For centuries, if you were a respected young person, you had to know how to play Chovgan. Just as important was mounted archery, a seriously deadly skill for both hunting and warfare. They were so good, historical accounts say their skill wowed even guys like Alexander the Great. So what happens when these ancient traditions crash into the modern world? Meet Farid. Back in the 90s, she took her ancestors' legacy all the way to the world stage. And she was incredible. Broke national records, won multiple gold medals, her talent was undeniable. But her journey showed a pretty harsh reality. A French trainer couldn't believe she competed internationally with no coach. Her story really highlights a bigger struggle. An opportunity to train in France was lost simply due to money. And Chovgan, the ancestor of polo, it's pretty much faded away too, now just an echo in history books. But the spirit isn't gone. Not at all. Other traditions are still going strong, and they are intense. Check this out. This is Oglak Tartishish, a wild, powerful game, kind of like Buzkashi in Afghanistan. You've got dozens of riders in this insane battle to grab a goat carcass and carry it to a goal. But maybe the most unique tradition doesn't even use a horse. It just mimics its spirit. This right here is Sarga 80. Think of it as a high-speed, human-powered carousel launching people into the air. I mean, look at that. It's a wild display of pure bravery and physics, powered only by people on the ground. The movements and pure guts you see here, it's a living link to their ancient warrior skills. So these traditions, still practiced today, they're way more than just sports. They're a declaration of identity. It's a testament to an enduring spirit, passed down, hoping the next generation also learns how to fly. You know, if you really want to understand the Uyghur people, you've got to understand their connection to the horse. It's this bond that goes way beyond just history and, honestly, right into the realm of myth. It's a story where the horse isn't just an animal. It's a fundamental part of the soul. For the nomadic Uyghurs out there on the Central Asian steppes, the horse was never just an animal. It was, and this is the beautiful part, their wings. It gave them the freedom to hunt, to travel, to survive. And that idea right there, the horse as the wing of the people, that's the key to this whole story. So to really get this, we've got to go way back to the beginning, to see how this incredible relationship was first forged in those vast, demanding landscapes. Right from the get-go, the horse was everything. In ancient times, it literally meant survival. Then, when things got more heated during periods of conflict, it became a tool of war, shaping this legendary warrior culture. And this skill on horseback got so famous that by the time of the Tang Dynasty, it was actually a high-fashion trend in foreign courts to ride like a Uyghur. And you know what? Even today, it's still a core symbol of their identity. And check this out. We have this quote from a Tang Dynasty poet. This shows it wasn't some niche skill. It was a full-blown cultural export. For half a century, the absolute elite of another empire thought Uyghur horsemanship was the pinnacle of style, the coolest thing you could do. So what happens when a culture built on incredible warrior skills finds itself in times of peace? Well, those skills don't just vanish. No way. They transform, they become sport, and they build a whole new, vibrant tradition.
And this is where things get really fun. It gave rise to this whole range of amazing equestrian sports. We're talking about intense games like Oglak Tartish, super exciting horse races, the high art of mounted archery, and a game that would eventually take over the world, Chovgan.
Okay, so take a look at this. This is Oglak Tartishish, also known as the goat pulling game. And yeah, it might look like just a wild free-for-all, but don't be fooled. This is a masterclass in strategy, raw strength, and just pure unadulterated horsemanship. It's basically the skills of the hunt and the battlefield turned into one incredible game. And then you've got mounted archery. I mean, come on. Ancient writers described Uyghur warriors as being so good they could be at a full gallop and shoot an arrow backwards just as accurately as they could forwards. That's not just a sport, right? That is the ultimate expression of unity between a human, an animal, and a weapon. But out of all these amazing games, one of them had a destiny that was going to stretch way beyond the steppes. Let's dig into Chovgan, a game you probably know by a completely different name. The journey this game took is just mind-blowing. On one side here, you see an ancient Uyghur manuscript showing Chovgan being played. And on the other, a modern international polo match. It's the same core game, the same spirit, just separated by centuries and entire continents. So what is Chovgan? Well, it's a team sport on horseback where you use a long mallet to hit a ball into a goal. Pretty straightforward. But its origin story is what's so cool. It starts right here in Central Asia. From there, it travels the Silk Road, spreading to Persia, then to India, which is where British officers discovered it, fell in love with it, and brought it back to the West, renaming it Polo. And the evidence for how deep these roots go is just undeniable. This incredible statue of a Chovgan player was found in a tomb in the Turpan region, and it dates as far back as the 5th century. Just let that sink in for a second. This game has been played here for at least 1,500 years. But what happens to a legacy like this in the modern world? Well, the story takes a pretty poignant turn when we look at the life of one of its last great champions. This is Pedagogy, an absolutely extraordinary equestrian who, in the late 20th century, really seemed destined to carry this ancient tradition of horsemanship to brand new heights. Her story is a modern echo of that entire legacy we've been talking about. Her talent was just immense, totally off the charts. In 1993, she wins double gold in a national competition. In 95, she's breaking records in dressage. And then in 1998, she makes history as the very first Uyghur rider to compete in the prestigious Asian Knights competition. But here's the thing. She was competing against just incredible odds. At that international competition, a French coach was completely stunned. He said, "This is the first time I have seen a rider come to an international competition without a trainer." Her skill was just pure, raw, inherited talent. But despite her world-class ability, her career was cut short. The reason? Simply a lack of funding. And since period, no other Uyghur rider has managed to reach that international stage. It's like the echo of 1,000 years of horsemanship just went silent. But a culture's spirit, that's a really hard thing to extinguish. Even when the central element is removed, the memory, the feeling can find new and really surprising ways to express itself. Which leads us to a fascinating question, right? How does a culture that was built on the back of a horse survive when the horses aren't really part of daily life anymore? Well, the answer is like this. It survives in the sargati, a traditional high-flying swing that is so much more than just a simple ride. It is a living, breathing memory of the horse. So the mechanics are simple and ancient. We're talking over 1,000 years old. There's a big central pillar with a wheel on top, and long ropes hang down. People on the ground start pushing, and as that wheel spins faster and faster, centrifugal force takes over and just sends the riders soaring through the air. And up there, high in the sky, they aren't just swinging. No, they're performing acrobatics. They twist their bodies into positions that perfectly mimic the motions of their ancestors, leaning off a galloping horse to fire an arrow at a target. It's an incredible act of cultural memory. The real horse might no longer be part of the game, but the spirit of the ride, that feeling of freedom, the bravery, it's all still there. The wing of the people has simply found a new and beautiful way to fly.
Imagine dangling 30 feet in the air, right? Just hanging by this single-foot-long loop of rope.
And you were spinning, violently spinning.
Exactly. I mean, the centrifugal force is so intense, it's literally draining the blood from your face.
Right, to the point where your skin turns this pale, sickly yellow.
Yeah, and the craziest part, you have no seatbelt. There's no safety net down below.
Nothing but the ground.
Right. And below you, there's this team of people pushing a giant wooden mechanism to spin you even faster. And you're doing all of this, subjecting your body to, like, aerospace-level G-forces just to practice shooting a bow and arrow.
It's the ultimate exercise in spatial disorientation. I mean, you are systematically overloading the vestibular system of your inner ear, just forcing your brain to adapt to extreme chaos.
It is absolute madness.
Yeah.
But it's also the wild reality of an ancient game called Sargati. And that's what we're getting into today. Welcome to our latest deep dive.
It's a fascinating topic, really.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because, when you look at modern sporting events today, there's this baseline expectation of, clinical precision, right? Total control.
Oh, absolutely. We engineer our athletic environments to completely remove the unexpected.
Yeah, we paint these undeniable white lines on manicured turf, we regulate the stadium temperature, and we codify all the rules on giant LED screens.
It's safe. It's predictable.
Right. It's totally contained.
We've optimized everything for fairness and risk mitigation. Modern sports are essentially abstractions of conflict, but the danger has been meticulously legislated out of them.
But when you step into the world of ancient Central Asian equestrian culture, which is our mission for you on this deep dive, that neat little containment box just shatters completely.
It doesn't exist.
No, we are looking at a landscape of athletic competition that is entirely boundless. It's driven not by, the desire for a shiny trophy, but by the absolute non-negotiable demands of surviving one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth.
And what becomes immediately clear when you analyze the historical and archaeological records we have is that these ancient survival mechanics didn't just stay on the steppes.
Right.
They actually laid the architectural and psychological groundwork for some of the most recognizable global games we play today.
And even surprisingly, the engineering behind modern theme park rides, which we'll get to.
We will. It's quite the journey.
So to really understand that evolution, I feel like we have to start with the environment. Let's set the scene for you.
We're talking about the ancient Uyghurs.
Right, inhabiting these vast territories near Lake Baikal, stretching all the way through the Irtysh River Valley and just navigating the sweeping, deeply harsh steppes of Central Asia.
It is absolutely crucial to understand the ecology of that region. I mean, you are dealing with extreme diurnal temperature shifts.
Like freezing nights and scorching days, right?
Exactly, plus vast distances of arid grassland and brutal winters. In that kind of biome, human bipedal locomotion is entirely insufficient.
You just can't walk it.
You can't. To these early nomadic groups, the horse was not merely an animal they managed or kept as a pet. It was literally a biomechanical extension of the human form.
Wow.
Yeah. Without the horse, you couldn't secure enough caloric intake through hunting, nor could you defend your territory from, competing nomadic federations.
There's actually this ancient proverb in the sources that I think captures that total psychological and physical integration perfectly. It says, "A horse is not just the wings of a man, but the wings of a nation."
That's a powerful statement.
It is, and I want you to really think about that phrasing.
Yeah.
Because they didn't view the horse as just a tool.
No, not at all.
Like, early humans discovering the wheel or fire. They viewed it as a physiological upgrade. It completely altered their perception of speed, distance, and, what the human body was even capable of achieving when fused with a 1,000-pound prey animal.
And that fusion, it's deeply embedded in their cultural mythology, too. The historical texts frequently reference this legendary figure, the great Chovgan, or emperor of the Uyghurs.
Frisia.
Yes, a Frisiab. The people actually viewed themselves as his direct descendants. And the defining trait attributed to a Frisiab was his, quote, panther-like strength and bravery.
Which is like an interesting biological metaphor to use for a horse riding culture.
How so?
Well, a panther is an ambush predator, right? It's agile, incredibly explosive, and lethal in very short bursts.
Precisely. And because they were tasked with defending these wide-open, highly permeable borders across the steppes, that explosive, panther-like martial capacity became the baseline requirement for citizenship.
Because they couldn't just build a wall.
Right. They couldn't rely on massive stone walls or natural mountain fortresses to protect them. Their defense was entirely mobile. Therefore, the mechanics of riding, shooting, and close-quarters combat had to be ingrained in their muscle memory from childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because here is the logistical problem for any highly militarized society. How do you maintain that razor-sharp, life-or-death readiness during peacetime?
It's the classic problem of a standing army.
Exactly. If you are a warrior culture, but there is no active threat on like a random Tuesday in the spring, how do you prevent those critical skills from atrophying?
Well, you have to gamify the survival mechanics.
You turn it into a sport.
You do. You elevate the preparation for war into a celebrated public spectacle.
Which brings us to the first major evolutionary leap in our deep dive, the art of atbegisi, or horse racing.
But we should clarify, this was not the Kentucky Derby.
Oh, not even close. This wasn't a 2-minute sprint on a perfectly raked dirt oval. The scale and the underlying science of these races are just staggering. I mean, they were actively genetically engineering their mounts.
The selective breeding practices were incredibly advanced for the era. The historical documentation points to a specific, highly prized breed known as the Argun horse.
The hybrid.
Yes. The nomadic breeders fundamentally understood the concept of hybrid vigor, so they deliberately captured wild, untamed steppe stallions and crossbred them with their domestic mares.
So they are actively seeking out the aggression, the bone density, and the sheer explosive power of a wild stallion, an animal that survives by literally fighting off predators. And they're splicing that with the herd instinct and the trainability of a domestic mare.
That is the exact biological alchemy they were after. I mean, a domestic horse might be easy to control, sure, but it lacks the explosive, fast-twitch muscle fibers required to outrun an ambush.
Right.
But a wild stallion has the speed, yet it's dangerously erratic in a tight military formation.
You can't trust it.
Exactly. So the Argun hybrid provided the perfect platform. It had immense stamina, aggressive speed, but a neurological temperament that could actually be commanded by a rider in the absolute chaos of a cavalry charge.
And the scale of how they tested these Argun horses is mind-bending. I mean, a minor local race might feature 10 to 30 horses,
Okay.
but the major regional events...
Oh, the major ones were massive.
Yeah, you're looking at 100 to 300 horses launching across the open plains simultaneously. I want you to just try and imagine the sheer acoustics of that event.
It would be deafening.
300 massively powerful hybrids galloping at full speed. The seismic vibration of 1,200 hooves hitting the dense steppe dirt. It wasn't just a race. It was like an acoustic weapon, a demonstration of sheer kinetic power.
And the terminology they use to govern these races is fascinating because it strips away any modern illusion of precise measurement.
Yeah, they didn't care about miles per hour.
No, they didn't measure the track in miles or kilometers. The distance of a long race was often referred to simply as a bear chipimur, which translates roughly to 1 galloping distance.
I love that so much. It's a completely organic unit of measurement. It's not about an arbitrary line drawn on a map by some official. It's defined entirely by the biological limit of the animal's lungs and the rider's endurance.
And it forces the rider to possess a molecular understanding of their specific horse's physiology.
Because if you push too hard...
If you misjudge your horse's lactic acid threshold on a 1 galloping distance track, your horse collapses. So the long-distance races were brutal tests of aerobic capacity and survival pacing.
Right.
But, and this is important, the equestrian culture wasn't solely focused on raw, lung-busting endurance. There was a second category of racing that was entirely about aesthetic and biomechanical control.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Yorga races. And this is where the utilitarian nature of warrior culture suddenly gives way to high art. Because Yorga is a specific type of pacing or dancing gait.
Yeah, to understand the difficulty of Yorga, we have to look briefly at equine biomechanics.
Walk us through it.
So a standard trot is a diagonal gait. The horse moves the front left leg and the back right leg simultaneously. It's efficient, yes, but it's bouncy. It's very jarring for the rider.
You're bouncing all over the saddle.
Exactly. Pacing, however, is a lateral gait. The horse moves the 2 legs on the same side of its body at the exact same time.
Like a camel kind of does.
Similar, yes. It is incredibly smooth, allowing the rider to sit almost perfectly still, but it requires massive neurological coordination and balance from the horse.
And they turned that highly difficult biomechanical movement into a high-stakes performance art. It's almost like a modern car show, like Pimp My Ride, but for horses.
That's a fun way to look at it.
Well, think about it. The riders would cover their pacing horses in vibrant, intricately woven blankets and these ornate leather saddles. But the most crucial piece of equipment was the bells.
The brass bells, right?
They would string 20 to 30 brass or bronze bells around the horse's neck and chest.
And those bells serve a fascinating dual purpose. I mean, visually, yes, they are a display of wealth and status.
True.
But acoustically, they act as an auditory lie detector for the horse's gait.
That's the perfect way to describe it. An auditory lie detector. It's like the timing belt in a high-performance engine. Because a pacing gait is a 2-beat lateral movement, it has a very specific metronomic rhythm.
A steady beat.
Right. So if the horse is perfectly trained and perfectly balanced, those 30 brass bells will chime in unison, creating this beautiful, synchronized, percussive music.
But if the horse loses concentration or, if the rider's balance shifts by even an inch and the horse breaks its lateral stride,
the rhythm is instantly destroyed. The bells just turn into a chaotic, clashing cacophony. The judges, and really the entire audience, don't even need to look at the horse's legs to know it made a mistake. They can hear the mechanical failure immediately.
It's brilliant.
I just want you to imagine standing on the edge of a frozen, hard-packed dirt path in the middle of winter. You don't hear the chaotic thunder of a stampede. Instead, you hear this perfectly synchronized musical trotting approaching from the distance, ringing out in the cold air. It's absolute total mastery over a massive animal, transformed into an equestrian ballet.
It is a profound synthesis of control. The same animal that can charge into battle is also capable of playing an intricate acoustic instrument with its own footfalls.
It's beautiful.
It is. But when we look at the modern context of these ancient practices, there is often a stark disconnect. The historical texts highlight the story of Paride, a young Uyghur woman competing in the 1990s, which I think perfectly illustrates the friction between ancestral capability and modern sporting infrastructure.
Yeah, Paride's story is so compelling because it proves that this deep generational muscle memory still exists today. So in the 1990s, she entered the Chinese National Games and absolutely dominated the equestrian events, taking home double gold medals.
She was incredible.
She was displaying a level of symbiotic control over the horse that left international observers completely stunned.
And the detail that really stands out in the contemporary accounts is the reaction of a French equestrian coach who witnessed her performance.
Oh, right.
He was actively trying to recruit her, assuming she had been trained in a highly formalized, heavily funded national program. He was completely astounded to discover she had no formal coach at all.
None.
Her expertise was entirely vernacular, passed down through cultural osmosis, and just unyielding personal dedication on the step.
But that raw ancestral talent eventually hit a bureaucratic wall, didn't it?
Sadly, yes.
Paride's career stalled out, not because she lacked the skill to compete globally, but because she existed outside the sanitized, highly capitalized box of modern sports. She couldn't secure the modern funding, the institutional backing, or the logistical support required to, transport horses to international competitions.
It's incredibly expensive.
Her story is essentially a microcosm of what happens when ancient grassroots mastery is forced to compete in a world optimized by corporate sponsorships. The DNA of the centaur is still there, but the modern world doesn't really know how to categorize it.
It's a poignant reality. Formalizing a survival skill into an Olympic sport often strips away the very people who originated the practice.
Yeah, that's so true.
But if we return to the historical timeline of the steppes, while the Yorga pacing proved a rider possessed delicate metronomic control, military commanders faced a completely different problem.
Right, because war isn't a dance.
Exactly. Pacing is beautiful, but a battlefield is visceral, kinetic, and utterly unpredictable. They needed a way to pressure test their cavalry in a scenario that mimicked the chaotic friction of war without actually, killing each other.
Which gives birth to what might be the most intense, mathematically complex combat simulator ever devised, Oglak Tartashish, which is widely recognized across the broader Central Asian region as Buzkashi.
This is the point where the abstraction of sport drops away and the brutal physics of warfare takes center stage.
I really need to paint the picture of this for you because it defies all modern logic of what a sport should be.
It really does.
So you have a massive, dusty expanse of land. You have dozens, sometimes hundreds of highly trained riders on these explosive Argoon horses. And the object they are fighting over, it's not a leather ball. It is a decapitated, fully cleaned 40-kilogram goat carcass.
That is nearly 90 pounds of dead weight.
90 pounds. They drop this carcass into the dirt, and a swarm of horses converges on it at full gallop. The riders are hanging completely off the sides of their saddles, practically dragging their hands in the dust, trying to rip this massive carcass off the ground while surrounded by hundreds of trampling hooves.
It sounds insane.
It looks like absolute, unmitigated chaos, pure anarchy.
It looks like anarchy to the outside observer, sure, but when you analyze the game theory behind Buzkashi, it is actually governed by a highly sophisticated, deeply ingrained honor code.
Wait, really? Because to modern eyes, it just looks like a free-for-all bar fight on horseback.
That is the illusion of the game. If it were truly a free-for-all, the casualty rate among the elite warriors and their most valuable horses would be catastrophic.
Oh, right. You can't break your best horse before a war.
Exactly. The leadership could not afford to lose their best cavalrymen to friendly fire during a training exercise. Therefore, the tradition strictly enforces complex rules. For example, a rider absolutely cannot use their whip on another player.
Makes sense.
You are forbidden from intentionally spooking or striking another man's horse. And you cannot deliberately unseat a rider.
So you have to exert maximum physical dominance over the carcass. But you must simultaneously exercise extreme restraint toward your opponent.
Exactly. Because the man you are aggressively fighting for the carcass today is the man who will be guarding your flank in a real battle tomorrow.
Wow.
The game demands total aggression tempered by absolute discipline. The victor is the man who can plunge into the chaos, secure the 90-pound carcass, pin it securely beneath his leg, which, by the way, requires staggering adductor muscle strength, and break free of the swarm to deliver it to a specific destination.
And historically, what was that destination?
Historically, they would gallop to the courtyard of the person designated to host the next match and hurl the carcass onto their property.
That is quite literally the most aggressive RSVP to a dinner party in human history.
It certainly leaves an impression.
I know the contemporary versions have evolved slightly. Like, some matches now require throwing the carcass into a raised circular net, almost like a 3-meter-high equestrian basketball hoop.
Yeah.
But I have to push back on the core mechanism here.
Okay, go ahead.
Purely from a logistical standpoint, using a goat carcass seems incredibly messy, prone to degrading, and frankly, kind of bizarre to modern ears. Why a goat? Why not just stitch together a heavy canvas or leather bag and fill it with 90 pounds of sand? Wouldn't that serve the exact same purpose?
It's a highly logical question from a modern engineering perspective. But if we analyze the specific tactical requirements of cavalry warfare, a sandbag is completely useless as a training tool.
Why? Dead weight is dead weight, isn't it?
Well, no. A bag of sand is static. It has a predictable, uniform center of gravity. A decapitated goat carcass, however, is asymmetrical. It has awkward, flailing limbs. Its center of mass shifts unpredictably as you grab it.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It perfectly mechanically simulates the dead weight of a human body.
Oh, wow. It's a dummy for a fallen soldier.
Exactly. Imagine you are in the vanguard of a cavalry charge, and the man next to you takes an arrow and falls from his horse. You cannot stop your horse to help him, or you will be overrun by the enemy.
You'd be trampled.
Right. You have to maintain a gallop, lean completely out of your saddle, hook your arm around his armor or his belt, deadlift his shifting, unconscious weight off the ground, pin him across your horse, and ride out of the kill zone.
That is staggering to think about. The raw core strength needed for that.
Or, conversely, consider the offensive application. You are raiding an enemy formation, and your objective is to take a high-value prisoner. You have to snatch a struggling, fully armored human being off his feet and drag him away.
So the goat.
Snatching that awkward, shifting goat carcass from the dirt while navigating a chaotic swarm of horses forces the rider to develop elite core strength, independent use of their hands while steering the horse entirely with their legs, and perfect spatial awareness. Buzkashi was not a game. It was a rigorous, highly specialized curriculum for close-quarters battlefield extraction and capture.
That completely reframes the entire spectacle. It's not just roughhousing. It's a life-saving drill disguised as a sport.
Absolutely.
So we have speed and aerobic capacity covered with the Apegisi racing. We have chaotic, close-quarters grappling and extraction covered with Buzkashi. But to dominate the Central Asian steppes, you also need long-range ballistics. Which brings us to the third evolution of their survival mechanics, mounted archery.
And this is the technological and tactical development that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the ancient world. To understand the impact of Uyghur mounted archery, the historical texts point us to a specific encounter documented by the 11th century scholar Mahmud al-Kashgari.
Okay, I love this story.
It details the moment when the forces of Alexander the Great, referred to in the region as Iskandar Zulkarnain, attempted to push into Uyghur territory.
Now wait, we have to set the stakes here. Alexander the Great's army was the premier fighting force of antiquity.
Unmatched.
Right. They had the Macedonian phalanx, these massive blocks of infantry bristling with 20-foot-long spears called sarissas. They had the companion cavalry, which was heavily armored. Alexander marched through the Persian Empire. He faced literal war elephants in India. Why would he hesitate upon reaching the Uyghur borders? What was the specific tactical friction his military mind encountered?
The friction was a complete mismatch in mobility and geometry. According to al-Kashgari's account, Alexander's vanguard was met by an advance guard of 4,000 Uyghur-mounted archers.
4,000.
Yes, and visually they were terrifying. The texts specifically note they wore headgear adorned with the wings of birds of prey, like falcons and eagles.
So they look like birdmen on horseback.
Basically. But it wasn't their aesthetic that caused Alexander to halt his advance. It was their complete mastery of physics while in three-dimensional motion.
Alexander realized his heavy, slow-moving phalanxes were suddenly obsolete.
Precisely. Because these 4,000 riders possessed a capability that broke the standard rules of engagement. They could initiate a charge at full gallop, unleash a barrage of arrows forward with devastating kinetic force, and then, without decelerating or altering the horse's trajectory.
This is the crazy part.
The riders could instantly pivot their torsos 180 degrees and continue firing backward with pinpoint accuracy as they rode away.
We really have to break down the sheer physiological complexity of that movement. I mean, you are on the back of a horse moving at 30 miles an hour over uneven terrain. You have no modern stirrups to lock your feet into.
No, the saddle technology was very different.
You have to completely let go of the reins. You are drawing a composite bow made of horn, wood, and sinew, which has an incredibly heavy draw weight, maybe 80 to 100 pounds.
Significant force, yes.
You fire, and then, relying entirely on the crushing grip of your thighs to stay attached to the horse, you twist your spine backward, visually acquire a new target amidst the dust and chaos, account for the trajectory and wind speed, draw that heavy bow again, and fire while moving away.
It's remarkable.
It's the ancient equivalent of a modern attack helicopter, or a tank equipped with a 360-degree rotating turret.
That is a highly accurate comparison.
Yeah.
And tactically, it creates a nightmare paradox for an invading force. In traditional ancient warfare, if your enemy turns their back and retreats, you have won the engagement.
Right, you chase them down.
You order your infantry or cavalry to pursue and cut them down. But against these mounted archers, a retreat was actually an offensive maneuver. If you chased them, you were willingly marching into a concentrated kill zone.
Because they're still shooting at you.
Exactly. Their retreat was just as lethal, if not more so, than their charge. It's the classic Parthian shot doctrine, executed with devastating efficiency.
It completely inverts the geometry of warfare. The predator becomes the prey simply by following the target.
It does.
But this level of ballistics mastery wasn't just invented in a vacuum for the purpose of fighting Greek armies. The foundation of this skill set was deeply ecological, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The military application was merely a byproduct of their daily survival strategy. The historical record provides a fascinating glimpse into this via an envoy from the Song dynasty, a diplomat named Wang Yande.
Wang Yande, what did he see?
He visited the Uyghur region around 981 AD and meticulously documented their hunting practices. He noted that their archery was so advanced, they didn't just hunt independently, they integrated their archery into a complex, multi-species cooperative hunting ecosystem.
Oh, the falconry connection.
Yes. Wang Yande observed that the riders utilize highly trained birds of prey falcons and eagles to flush game out of the brush or track animals across vast distances.
So they're working with the birds.
Once the raptor had isolated or distracted the prey, the rider would close the distance and execute the kill with the bow from horseback.
I want you to think about the level of synergy required for that to work. You have a human mind anticipating the flight path of an apex aerial predator, while simultaneously managing the galloping mechanics of a 1,000-pound terrestrial prey animal, all to secure enough protein to survive the winter.
It's incredibly complex.
It is the absolute pinnacle of environmental adaptation.
But as history progresses, a fascinating shift occurs. These nomadic, highly militarized groups begin to interact more frequently with vast, settled bureaucratic empires like the Tang and Song dynasties in China or the Persian empires to the south.
Right along the Silk Road, right.
Exactly. And as those interactions grow, these raw, chaotic survival simulators had to evolve. They had to be abstracted into something that was spectator-friendly, highly organized, and bound by complex team strategy.
And that evolutionary leap gives us a game that today is universally associated with high society luxury, designer clothing brands, and European country clubs. We are talking about polo.
Yes. Long before it was embroidered on a collared shirt, polo was a grueling, bone-crushing test of horsemanship on the Central Asian steppes.
So how does a game meant to simulate war evolve into polo? Let's trace the mechanics of that.
Well, the game that eventually became polo was originally known by the Turkic populations as degnek, and it appears in Persian records as Chovgan. The first major shift from games like Buzkashi or long-distance racing is the type of equine biomechanics required.
Okay, how so?
If you are playing Chovgan, you do not want the Argan horse that runs in a straight line for 20 miles. You need a completely different chassis.
Right. A long-distance racehorse is like a drag racer built for top speed in one direction. But polo requires a sports car. You need a horse with a short-coupled back, a very low center of gravity, and massive hindquarter strength, because the entire game is about rapid deceleration, pivoting on the hind legs, and explosive acceleration in a new direction.
Precisely. And the archaeological record proves just how deeply entrenched this specific game was in the region's culture. In 1970, archaeologists excavating the Astana tombs in Turpan, which date back to between the 5th and 7th centuries, made a remarkable discovery.
This is one of my favorite details in the research. They found a painted clay statue inside the tomb. It's quite small, only about 37 centimeters tall, but the level of specific detail is incredible.
It really is.
It depicts a man with a distinct mustache sitting astride a white horse. He is wearing a highly tailored short coat and specialized riding boots. In his right hand, he is holding a distinct, long-handled polo mallet.
And the posture is what's truly striking.
Yes. The genius of the sculpture is in the posture. The artist sculpted the rider's neck and eyes to be locked firmly downward, intensely focused on an invisible ball near the horse's hooves. It is a perfect snapshot of an athlete entirely in the zone, a moment of kinetic focus frozen in clay for over a millennium.
The fact that this statue was placed in a tomb indicates that mastery of this game was considered a vital component of the deceased's identity, something they literally needed to carry with them into the afterlife.
That shows how important it was.
And it wasn't just played casually on the open plains either. They engaged in massive public works projects to build dedicated infrastructure for the sport. The archaeological texts detail the ruins of a colossal ancient stadium discovered in Tashkurgan, located high up on the Pamir Plateau.
And we should note, the Pamir Plateau is at an incredibly high altitude. The air is thin.
Yes.
Just breathing is difficult, let alone engaging in a high-speed equestrian sport. But they built a stadium there.
A massively engineered arena. The playing field itself measured 150 meters in length, roughly the size of 1.5 modern American football fields.
That's huge.
But the most striking architectural feature was the perimeter. The field was enclosed by raised earthen walls that reached up to 6 meters high in some sections.
6 meters. That is a 20-foot-high wall of compacted earth surrounding the field. Why would they invest the labor to build a wall that massive?
It serves two vital functions. First, it is an explicit indicator of a massive spectator culture. The raised walls allowed thousands of people to watch the chaotic, high-speed action safely from above, without the risk of being trampled by a horse or struck by a high-velocity ball.
Okay, safety first. And the second function?
Second, it fundamentally changes the fluid dynamics of the game.
Oh, because the ball doesn't go out of bounds.
Exactly. With a 20-foot wall, the ball stays in continuous play. Riders could intentionally bank the ball off the walls to bypass defenders, much like modern indoor soccer or arena polo. It drastically increases the speed, the continuous physical exertion, and the geometric complexity of the game.
That's amazing. Let's talk about the ball itself, because they weren't hitting a hard wooden or plastic sphere like modern polo players, right?
No, not at all.
The sources indicate the ball was essentially a heavy leather pouch, tightly packed with wool to give it substantial mass and a dampened bounce. Sometimes they even used an inflated lambskin.
And the layout of the arena was imbued with deep philosophical and cosmic symbolism. They didn't just paint lines on the ground to mark the goals. They erected massive banners at either end of the 150-meter field. One end was marked with the flag of the sun, and the opposite end was marked with the flag of the moon.
So the riders are literally acting as celestial bodies, ferrying this object back and forth across the heavens. It grounds the violence of the sport in the cosmic order of the universe.
The rules governing the start of the match also reflected their meritocratic warrior ethos. To commence play, the ball wasn't simply dropped in the middle.
How did it start?
According to ancient dictionaries that preserve the rules of Chovgan, a player would strike the heavy leather ball high into the air. While it was airborne, the players would strike it. Whoever managed to hit the ball the hardest and farthest, demonstrating the greatest initial kinetic power and hand-eye coordination, earned the right to lead the offensive charge for their team.
So we have this deeply embedded, highly engineered steppe sport played in massive walled stadiums beneath the flags of the sun and the moon. How does that localized phenomenon manage to traverse the globe and end up on the perfectly manicured lawns of British country clubs?
Chovgan was arguably one of the most successful viral cultural exports of the Silk Road. Because it was highly structured and spectator-friendly, it appealed immensely to the royal courts of settled empires.
Right.
It traveled east into China, becoming an absolute obsession for the emperors and nobility of the Tang and Song dynasties. It also traveled south through the mountain passes into the Indian subcontinent, introduced by the nomadic conquerors who established the Mughal Empire, specifically the Emperor Babur.
And it is in India where the British Empire finally enters the narrative.
Yes. In the mid-19th century, around 1859, British tea planters and military officers stationed in Manipur, India, observed the local populations playing this incredibly fast, dangerous game.
And they loved it.
The British officers, who already possessed a strong cavalry tradition, were entirely captivated. They adopted the game, standardized the rules for their own use, and founded the first European polo clubs, eventually exporting it back to London and then to the Americas.
But despite its modern association with wealth and royalty, the historical texts demand we remember its raw, utilitarian roots.
Yeah.
There is a quote from the 11th century scholar Yusuf Khas Hajib that perfectly distills what this game meant to the Uyghur people.
That's a great quote.
He wrote that a young man was not considered truly a man and had no right to claim a place of honor in society unless he had mastered the trifecta of survival. He had to know how to hunt, he had to know how to shoot an arrow, and he had to know how to play Chovgan.
It was the ultimate crucible of capability, and the culture surrounded it with massive economic stakes. The historical records indicate that spectators would wager enormous sums of money, entire herds of livestock, and valuable trade goods on the outcomes of these matches. It was a massive economic and social engine.
But this brings us to a fascinating transition point in our deep dive. We have tracked how the biological necessity of survival on horseback generated the genetic engineering of racehorses, the brutal combat simulation of Buzkashi, the tactical supremacy of mounted archery, and the global sporting export of polo.
All of which are heavily reliant on the horse.
Right. All of these require vast open spaces and thousands of horses. But what happens when these nomadic people transition into urbanized city life? Or what happens during harsh winters when the horses must be conserved? They still possess that fierce, adrenaline-seeking DNA. They still have a biological need to test their spatial awareness and courage.
They cannot simply abandon their physiological need for extreme kinetic movement. So if they cannot ride across the earth, they engineer a way to take to the sky.
And this brings us to the Sargedi, the most mind-blowing piece of ancient engineering in this entire deep dive, also known as Shapulek, which translates to the circle swing. This is an ancient, gravity-defying aerial centrifuge designed to subject the human body to extreme rotational forces.
It is a remarkable adaptation of vernacular engineering, utilizing simple materials, wood and rope, to achieve complex aerodynamic results.
I cannot emphasize this enough. They are building massive structures to throw themselves into the air, spinning at terrifying velocities with absolutely zero safety harnesses. Where does the psychological impulse to build something like this even originate?
The historical texts trace the psychological origins back to a deep-seated cultural myth documented extensively by the brilliant 10th century polymath Abu Rayhan Biruni.
Okay, what's a myth?
He recorded a legend regarding an ancient mythical king named Jamshid. According to the folklore, King Jamshid possessed a magnificent cart or throne, and he commanded demons to lift this cart high into the air and carry him across the sky.
A very standard Tuesday for an ancient mythical king.
Precisely. But the population sought to commemorate this legendary act of flight. To simulate the king's journey, they began constructing massive wooden swings. Over time, this evolved from a simple swinging motion into a highly complex rotational mechanism, becoming a centerpiece of major celebrations like Nowruz, the vernal equinox New Year, and large communal weddings.
Let's break down the actual engineering of these structures, because we are not talking about a playground swing set. The documentation outlines two distinct types of Sargedi. Let's start with type 1.
The large one.
Yeah. Picture a massive, single wooden mast driven deep into the ground. The central pole is 20 meters tall. That is over 60 feet high, the equivalent of a 6-story building.
Erecting a single timber of that height requires significant collective labor and precise foundational engineering to prevent it from snapping under dynamic load.
At the very top of the 60-foot mast, they mounted a horizontal crossbeam, creating a massive T-shape against the sky. From the ends of this crossbeam, they suspended long ropes with simple swings attached. Now, near the base of the mast, they attached a lower crossbar.
For the motor.
Right. A team of strong men on the ground would grip this lower bar and begin to run in a circle, acting as a human motor to rotate the entire massive structure.
As the men on the ground accelerate the rotation, physics takes over. The centripetal force acts on the central mast, but the swings suspended from the top are subjected to inertia and centrifugal force.
It pushes them out.
Right. As the rotational velocity increases, the swings and the riders are pushed outward and upward, expanding the radius of their flight path until they are flying in a massive, high-speed circle dozens of feet above the ground.
It is the exact same mechanical principle as the swing ride or the wave swinger that you see at modern theme parks. Now, the modern mechanized version of that ride was patented in California around 1908, and it was perfected by German engineers in the 1970s using high-tensile steel, hydraulics, and powerful electric motors.
Oh, the modern ones are incredibly complex.
But the Uyghurs were executing this exact same physics experiment 1,000 years ago, powered entirely by human muscle, relying on the tensile strength of hemp rope, and without a single seatbelt to keep the rider from being launched into the stratosphere.
It is an astonishing display of confidence in their own carpentry and physical grip strength. But Type 1, the 60-foot swing, is actually the introductory level.
Wait, really?
Yes. Type 2 is where the mechanism transitions from a celebratory ride into a grueling extreme sport.
Okay, Type 2 is where my palms actually start to sweat just reading about it. The engineering changes. Instead of a 60-foot pole, they use a shorter, stouter mast, about 8 to 10 meters, so roughly 25 to 30 feet high, still high enough to be lethal if you fall. But instead of a horizontal beam at the top, they mount an actual heavy wooden cartwheel horizontally on a pivot.
And the suspension system is drastically altered. Instead of long ropes with comfortable seats, they attach extremely short ropes to the outer rim of the wheel. These ropes are only 30 to 50 centimeters long, barely a foot or a foot and a half of cord.
That's nothing.
And at the end of each short rope is a simple loop.
No seat, no harness. You have the 30-foot pole, a spinning wheel, and a foot of rope with a loop. The rider has to climb up the pole, slip one of their legs into that tiny loop, grip the short rope with their bare hands, and suspend themselves in the air.
Just hang in there.
Yeah. Once they're attached, the team on the ground begins to violently spin the central axis.
You are being whipped around a central pivot point at intense speeds. Because the rope is so short, the rotational frequency is much higher than Type 1.
The G-forces must be insane.
You are experiencing significant G-forces held aloft entirely by the friction of a rope against your leg and the crushing grip strength of your forearms.
Which begs the ultimate question. Why? If you live in a society where survival is already difficult, where winter is brutal and warfare is constant, why would you intentionally subject yourself to a game with such an incredibly high risk of catastrophic injury?
Because of what the machine simulates. This is the profound analytical takeaway of the Sargadi. The machine was designed to be the ultimate simulator of the horse for men who didn't currently have access to a horse.
Oh, it's a landlocked flight simulator for cavalrymen.
Exactly. The historical accounts clearly describe how the riders behaved while suspended in the air. They didn't just close their eyes and hold on in terror.
What do they do?
While spinning violently, experiencing extreme centrifugal force and vertigo, the riders would actively mimic the mechanics of mounted archery. They would release their grip with one hand, pretend to draw a heavy bow, shooting arrows forward, and then contort their spines to shoot backward, all while the world spun crazily around them.
They are actively training their inner ear.
Yes.
They're deliberately inducing spatial disorientation and vertigo to train their brains to maintain visual focus and target acquisition. If you can track a target and mime a perfect bow draw while spinning on a wooden wheel 30 feet in the air, then shooting from the back of a galloping, pivoting Argun horse probably feels like standing completely still.
It is an incredibly sophisticated method of neurophysical conditioning. It maintained their martial spirit, their spatial awareness, and their absolute fearlessness in the face of kinetic chaos, ensuring that the warrior ethos didn't atrophy when they transitioned to urban environments.
And the physiological reality of what this machine did to the human body is baked right into the name. As we mentioned at the beginning, the word Sargadi literally translates to turning yellow.
Yes, it does.
It is a direct observation of the biological fear response. The G-forces of the rapid spinning, combined with a massive dump of adrenaline from hanging by a single loop of rope, causes acute vasoconstriction.
The blood leaves the surface of the skein.
It literally rushes away, leaving both the riders and the terrified spectator standing below with a pale, sickly yellow complexion. They named the sport after the biological symptom of extreme terror.
It is absolute truth in advertising. You are willingly stepping into an arena designed to push your nervous system to the absolute brink of panic, and the goal is to conquer that panic and execute a mock military maneuver.
It perfectly distills the entire ethos of everything we have discussed on this deep dive. We have traced an astonishing arc of human ingenuity and physical capability. We started in the harsh, freezing plains of the Irtysh River Valley, examining how the brutal necessity of survival forced the genetic engineering of the explosive Argan warhorse.
We saw how they took the grim, desperate mechanics of rescuing a wounded comrade from the battlefield and abstracted it into Buzkashi, a heavily regulated, honor-bound combat simulator centered around a 90-pound shifting dead weight.
We analyzed the terrifying physics of their mounted archers, men who could manipulate the geometry of warfare by shooting backward at full gallop, frustrating the greatest military minds of antiquity, like Alexander the Great.
We tracked the evolution of those raw survival skills into Degnek and Chovgan, watching a chaotic steppe training exercise transform into the highly strategic, walled stadium spectacle of Polo, which eventually captivated emperors and British cavalry officers alike.
And finally, we saw how that deeply entrenched, unyielding demand for adrenaline and spatial mastery took to the skies in the Sargati, a human-powered centrifuge designed to train the inner ear by spinning men by their ankles until they turned pale with fear.
Analyzing these ancient practices provides a fascinating lens through which to view our own modern behaviors. It encourages you to look closely at the games your own culture plays.
Yeah, that's a great point.
When you watch a heavily armored football player track a ball in the air, or a gymnast execute a blind, twisting dismount, or even children playing a frantic game of tag on a playground, what ancient life-or-death survival mechanics are hiding inside those movements. We have formalized our ancient necessities into weekend entertainment.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
Yeah.
And it leads me to one final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. The historical accounts make a very specific point to note that these traditional Uyghur games, the racing, the archery, the Sargati, survived for centuries despite massive historical upheavals. Despite the loss of territorial control, shifting empires, and the relentless march of modernization, these practices endured. And they didn't endure because of massive state funding or corporate sponsorships. They survived through pure, grassroots cultural passion. The people simply refused to let the fire of their ancestors go out.
It was a legacy carried entirely in the cultural bloodstream, passed from muscle memory to muscle memory.
Exactly. And looking at that unbroken chain of physical courage makes you wonder about the trajectory of our own society. We live in an era where virtually everything we interact with, from the sensors in our cars to the rubberized flooring at our playgrounds to the smartwatches monitoring our heart rates, is ruthlessly optimized for maximum safety and digital convenience. We have engineered the risk out of our daily lives.
We really have.
But in doing so, by actively insulating ourselves from physical danger and unpredictability, are we allowing a fundamental, vital part of the human spirit to atrophy? In our perfectly manicured stadiums and our perfectly climate-controlled lives, are we forgetting how to fly without a safety net, just like the fearless riders of the Sargati? Just something for you to mull over the next time you see a perfectly painted white line on a pristine field.
This material explores the rich history of traditional Uyghur equestrian sports, detailing their cultural significance and evolution from ancient survival skills to organized games like Polo and the aerial Tedbiryay Bilig. Let's dive right into the feedback to help the author elevate this highly informative piece.
I am so ready. The raw research the author has compiled here is, it's just staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
But you know, the challenge with a historical timeline this vast is ensuring the human element doesn't just get lost in the centuries.
Precisely. Integrating modern personal narratives seamlessly into the historical timeline strengthens the overall thematic continuity of the piece. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that modern writers lack support.
Right, yeah.
We are deep in the Tang dynasty, reading about the Argun breed and the vast networks of equestrian reverence. And then suddenly, we are introduced to Perilla Ride. You know, the modern Uyghur equestrian who won double gold in 1993 and 1995.
It is quite the jump.
It really is. The text establishes her incredible talent, but then immediately drops into a lament about her arriving in France without a trainer. It ends on this note of modern decline.
Yeah.
Introducing her story right after ancient history feels a bit like watching a sprawling historical documentary that suddenly cuts to a local news sports interview without any kind of bridge.
I completely agree. Is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
Right, exactly.
Because the weakness here is that the anecdote about Parilla Ride is abruptly dropped into the historical breakdown of horse racing.
It creates this sort of temporal void.
Exactly. It ends on a note of unexplained decline, disrupting the narrative flow and leaving the reader wondering how her specific struggles relate to the broader historical legacy they just read about.
I actually got completely pulled out of the text when that jump happened. I had to stop and ask myself, wait, did I skip a chapter?
Yeah, you lose your footing as a reader.
You really do. We go from an era where winning riders were showered with wealth and silk by entire empires, straight to a scenario in the 1990s where an internationally recognized athlete arrives at a global competition completely alone.
The juxtaposition itself is inherently fascinating.
It is, but the mechanics of that transition just aren't there. How do we get from ancient abundance to modern infrastructural scarcity?
So my suggestion for improvement would be to reframe this section. You want to explicitly connect Paradide's modern triumphs and infrastructural challenges to the ancient texts.
Make it intentional.
Yes. Use her story as a thematic anchor that illustrates the evolution and current state of the culture, rather than treating it as an isolated factoid.
So how do we actually do that on the page? Give me some concrete examples of how the author can fix this.
Well, one concrete example is you could move Paradise's story to a dedicated concluding section.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a section that explicitly contrasts the ancient reverence and abundant resources for riders with the modern infrastructural challenges she faced.
That makes logical sense.
It does. Alternatively, and I actually think this is the stronger option, use her 1990s victories as a framing device at the very beginning of the horse racing section.
Wait, so start with her?
Exactly. Contrast her arrival at international competitions without a trainer against the historical accounts of vast, highly organized Uyghur equestrian networks.
Oh, starting with the isolation. That immediately creates a mystery for the reader.
Right. You use that display of sheer individual grit to springboard backward into the historical accounts. It creates a narrative hook that pulls the reader through the Tang Dynasty history rather than just asking them to read a dry timeline.
That's a great takeaway. That isolation Parrot felt isn't just a modern infrastructural issue. It's a symptom of how the origins of these sports have been completely forgotten globally.
Completely.
Tracing the specific transitional steps of a cultural export provides a more robust and convincing historical argument. Let's look closely at the section discussing Chovgan, or Polo.
The archaeological evidence there is just fantastic.
Oh, the Turpan Astana tomb statues?
Yes, it establishes the Central Asian roots perfectly.
It does. But then the text rapidly lists its spread to Tibet, India, Japan, and eventually to British tea planters in 1859.
It speeds up significantly.
It is fascinating, but jumping from ancient Central Asian tombs directly to 19th century British tea estates feels like a geographical teleportation. We are entirely missing the travel itinerary of this cultural export.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how that impacts the authority of the piece.
What do you mean?
Well, the weakness is that the section on Polo establishes its origins well, but it relies on rapid, generalized leaps to explain its global spread.
Right.
This leaves the causal chain underdeveloped. It makes the historical claim of transmission feel more like a list of coincidences than a documented journey.
And without that connective tissue, the reader might feel a sense of whiplash.
Exactly. My suggestion would be to bolster this section by explicitly detailing the mechanisms of this cultural transmission.
Show the plumbing, essentially.
Yes, address shared regional origins or specific historical trade routes to make the historical claim more academically robust and satisfying for the reader.
What are some concrete examples of how they could show that plumbing?
So as a concrete example, they could briefly discuss the role of the Silk Road trade routes.
Oh, of course.
Or mention specific diplomatic exchanges during the Tang and Song dynasties that facilitated this transfer.
How does the sport physically move across borders?
Trade and diplomacy.
That makes perfect sense.
Another concrete example would be acknowledging the linguistic blending. The author mentions the use of the Persian word Chovgan alongside the Turkic dignik.
Right, I remember that detail.
Lean into that. Show a nuanced understanding of cross-cultural exchange before reasserting the Uyghur and Central Asian foundational influence. Language is like a fossil record.
That's a great way to put it. Highlighting that linguistic fingerprint proves the sport didn't just magically teleport. It was traded, adapted, and renamed.
Exactly. It changes it from a bulleted list into a living map of cultural trade.
Show us the passport stamps.
Right, exactly.
So, speaking of things moving across time and losing their context, let's pivot. Drawing explicit thematic parallels between ancient survival training and modern recreational engineering elevates the impact of the historical research.
Oh, we are getting to the Chalk Palek section.
Yes! So, a key theme running through the final section is the evolution of Chalk Palek, or Sargadi.
The descriptions there are so vivid.
They really are. The text vividly describes how this dangerous aerial wheel swing originated to train warriors to shoot arrows backward while spinning.
Just terrifying to imagine.
Absolutely. Then it compares this ancient practice directly to the modern amusement park swing ride, citing Zero's 1974 mechanized designs.
I saw that transition.
I can see what you're going for here, but let's see how we can strengthen this. Comparing a survival-based warrior training tool to a California theme park ride is like saying a medieval catapult is just an early version of a t-shirt cannon.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right? It's structurally similar, but the soul of the activity is entirely different.
Building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the philosophical evolution of danger?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Because the weakness here is that the conclusion asserts the ancient Chalk Palek is the ancestor of the modern swing ride, but this connection is presented merely as a structural similarity.
Yeah, it feels a bit thin.
It jarringly shifts the piece from an academic historical tone to a piece of modern trivia without a strong thematic bridge.
It feels like a fun fact tacked onto the end of a serious thesis.
Exactly. So my suggestion is to reframe this comparison, not just as a timeline of mechanical invention, but as a philosophical evolution of danger.
How so?
Explore how an ancient exercise designed to simulate the terror and skill of combat evolved into sanitized global entertainment.
Sanitized global entertainment, that is the perfect way to phrase it.
Give me some concrete examples of how to build that thematic bridge.
Well, as a concrete example, you could contrast the visceral, fearless motives of the historical Uyghur archers, suspended on ropes, with the mechanized, safety-harnessed experience of the modern Zero swing ride.
Right, the stakes are completely different.
Entirely. Another concrete example would be framing the modern amusement ride as an unconscious global echo of the fearless Uyghur spirit.
Oh, that's powerful.
You use the transition to highlight how modern society seeks the thrill of danger that ancient riders faced as a daily reality.
Because the author mentions that the word Sargadi comes from their faces turning yellow or pale from vertigo, right?
Yes, it was an exercise in mastering literal, paralyzing fear. You didn't get on the wheel to eat cotton candy. You got on it so you didn't die in a cavalry charge.
That changes the entire emotional resonance of the ending.
It does. It validates the author's entire thesis about the lasting impact of this equestrian culture.
It really elevates the research.
All right, to recap, we discussed integrating modern narratives, like Parody Story, to anchor the historical timeline, tracing the specific transitional steps of Polo's global spread to build a more robust argument, and bridging the thematic gap between the ancient Chalk Palek and modern amusement rides by focusing on the evolution of danger.
The foundation of this piece is incredibly strong, and these edits will just make it shine.
Absolutely. Here is the actionable summary for the listener. For your next draft, try moving Parody Story to frame the racing section. Explicitly mention Silk Road trade routes when discussing polo, and add a few sentences contrasting the warrior spirit of the ancient wheel swing with the safety harness thrill of the modern theme park ride. We would love to see how you incorporate these changes. Please submit your revised work back in for another critique.
Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Whether you're catching up on a new field or just insanely curious, we've got a fascinating journey for you today. So I want you to imagine your daily commute, right?
Okay, yeah.
But instead of, just hopping in a car or a train. Your mode of transportation is simultaneously your primary weapon, your sporting equipment, and like the absolute center of your entire cultural identity.
That is a lot of pressure to put on a commute.
Right. But today we are diving into this massive stack of historical texts, archaeological reports, and cultural studies, and they all detail the history of traditional Uyghur equestrian sports.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
It is. Our mission today is to explore how the brutal everyday necessities of just surviving the ancient Central Asian steppes, how they didn't just remain survival skills, they actually evolved into these highly sophisticated, organized sports. And eventually, like centuries later, they turned into the exact kinds of amusement park rides you see today.
Which is wild to think about. What's fascinating here is that for the ancient Uyghurs living around the Irtysh River and those vast expanses of Central Asia, the horse, it wasn't just an animal. It wasn't just a utility.
Right.
The historical texts we're looking at, they explicitly refer to the horse as the wings of the nation.
Wings of the nation. Wow.
Yeah, because in an environment that unforgiving, I mean, if you lacked a horse, you lacked mobility. You lacked food security. You literally couldn't defend your territory.
You were essentially stranded.
Exactly. The fusion between human and animal was so complete that it produced what we can accurately describe as a centaur culture.
A centaur culture. I love that phrasing. And before we get into, the extreme sports they engineered, we really have to look at the psychology behind that connection.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the sources highlight this profound reverence for Afrasiab, the great Kagan.
The legendary leader, yeah.
Right. He was this figure who supposedly instilled what do they call it, a tiger-like or leopard-like bravery in his people?
Yeah, they literally viewed themselves as his descendants.
And that fierce kind of predatory confidence, it wasn't just a myth they told around the fire. It fundamentally dictated how they approached horsemanship. They didn't just ride the horse, they dominated the landscape.
And that dominance, it was universally recognized, even by their most powerful neighbors.
Like the Chinese empires?
Yeah, specifically during the Tang dynasties.
Yeah.
We're talking roughly the 7th to 10th centuries. Chinese literary figures were documenting this constantly.
Right.
You have these prominent poets, Yuan Zhen and Bai Jui.
Yeah, they were writing in absolute awe of these Uyghur writers.
Really, Bai Jui actually penned this famous poem specifically about the Chovgan Road, which was this vital trade artery.
Mm-hmm.
And he described Uyghur merchants bringing down herds of horses so massive that they would essentially just erase the grasslands as they moved.
Just consume everything in their path.
Right. Their whole societal influence, their economy, their military might, it was all entirely hoof-based.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when an entire society possesses that level of universal equestrian expertise, you inevitably get competition.
Oh, of course. Human nature.
Yeah, you have to establish a hierarchy somehow. And they did that through abigisi, or horse racing. But looking at the source documents, it's clear this wasn't just, a simple sprint from one village to the next.
No, not at all.
They divided racing into two highly specialized disciplines. And the first one was this grueling ultra-endurance race across the raw steppe.
And you couldn't just use a standard domestic horse for this.
Right, that's the crazy part. They intentionally engineered a specific breed just for this, called the Shulgut Argun.
Yeah, the breeding of the Shulgut Argun is just a brilliant piece of ancient biotechnology.
It really is.
They would intentionally cross a wild steppe stallion with a domestic mare.
Which sounds incredibly difficult to manage.
Oh, absolutely. But they had to do it because a fully domestic horse, sure, it might have the temperament for a rider, but it lacked the bone density. It lacked the sheer lung capacity to survive a multi-day race across freezing, uneven terrain.
While a wild stallion has that raw, untamed stamina.
Exactly. So by crossing them, they captured the biological resilience of the wild, but with the trainability required for the sport. And the stakes for these endurance races were just immense.
We're talking life-changing prizes, right?
Yeah. Winning could mean acquiring entire herds of livestock, securing this legendary honor for your family.
Mm-hmm.
And often, a champion rider would win the hand of the most eligible woman in the community.
It was everything. But while that endurance race is all about raw biological power, the second type of race is entirely about precision.
Yes.
It's called at Yorgaludish, which roughly translates to rhythmic pacing.
Such a contrast to the ultramarathon.
Exactly. If the first race is an ultramarathon, this second discipline is essentially like modern Olympic dressage, but, with an added element of intense musicality and step flair.
Yeah, the visuals of this are amazing.
Right. The riders would dress the horses in these vibrant, meticulously embroidered blankets, and they would attach heavy brass and bronze bells all across the horse's chest and neck.
So it's auditory as much as visual.
Totally. Because the objective wasn't to cross a finish line first. It was to maintain a perfectly smooth, artistic trot, where the bells would ring in exact mathematical rhythm with the horse's hooves. It was a synchronized dance.
And that requires a profound level of nonverbal communication between the rider and the animal.
Because you can't just yank the reins to make them dance.
No, absolutely not. To achieve that rhythmic pacing, the rider can't use aggressive reining at all. They have to guide the horse using these tiny micro-adjustments of their own body weight and leg pressure.
Which takes years to master.
It does, and it demonstrates a society that has moved way beyond merely surviving on horseback. When you can dedicate years to perfecting the aesthetic, musical movement of a war horse, you've reached the absolute pinnacle of that particular cultural discipline.
And the thing is, that specific artistic discipline didn't just fade into antiquity.
No, it survived.
Yeah, our sources include this deeply poignant account of a modern Uyghur writer named Farida Abdurrahman.
Her story is incredible.
It really is. So in the 1990s, she was just completely dominant in this sport. She won double gold at the 1993 Chinese National Games. And by 1998, she was shattering records in rhythmic pacing.
Earning her the title Fairy of the Steed.
Fairy of the Steed. I mean, what a title.
But her trajectory, while incredible, serves as this stark example of the friction between cultural wealth and modern economic reality.
Yeah, this is where the story takes a turn.
During her peak, there was a prominent French equestrian coach who observed her competition, and he was entirely stunned. I mean, blown away that she was performing at a world-class elite level without any formal professional trainer or modern facilities.
It was just purely inherited cultural knowledge and raw talent.
Exactly. So he immediately invited her to relocate to France, to train and compete on the global stage.
But she never went. The financial barriers were just simply insurmountable. She couldn't afford the travel, let alone the immense upkeep required to maintain an international equestrian career. So it just ended before it even began.
It's a quiet tragedy, really. It perfectly illustrates how an ancient heritage can produce an athlete of just unparalleled caliber. But without the modern economic infrastructure to support it, that brilliance just remains localized.
It forces you to wonder, right? How many globally dominant athletes exist right now in these traditional sports, completely invisible to the wider world just due to financial constraints?
It's a heavy thought.
It is. But to understand the roots of that profound control we saw in rhythmic pacing, we really have to look at its original practical application.
Right, because it wasn't just for shows.
No. That level of hyper-precise, weight-based control over the horse, when you can steer a massive animal entirely with your legs and just shifting your center of gravity, it frees up your hands. And out on the steppe, you desperately needed your hands for a bow.
Precisely. The foundational military skill of this entire region was horseback archery.
And to grasp the sheer scale and effectiveness of this, the historical records give us this wild encounter involving Alexander the Great.
Oh, this is one of my favorite anecdotes in the sources.
Right. So as his forces pushed toward the region, the texts note that he was intercepted by a vanguard of 4,000 Uyghur archers.
And they were incredibly visually striking. They wore these tall hats constructed entirely from falcon feathers.
Which is intimidating enough, but the visual intimidation wasn't what actually gave Alexander pause. It was their kinetic mechanics.
The way they moved.
Yeah. These archers were riding at a full galloping sprint, and they were able to rotate their torsos and shoot their arrows backward at pursuing targets with the exact same lethal accuracy as shooting forward.
The biomechanics of that maneuver are just staggering if you break it down.
Yeah, paint a picture for us.
Okay, so you are riding a 1,000-pound animal at 30 miles an hour over uneven ground. You have no hands on the reins whatsoever.
Zero control with your hands.
Right. You rotate your spine 180 degrees, you draw a heavy recurve bow, you calculate the trajectory, account for the speed of your own horse and the target's horse. Yeah. And then you release, all while maintaining your balance solely through knee pressure.
Which naturally requires an almost inhuman level of core strength. And spatial awareness.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to how they pressure tested these riders. I mean, if you want to simulate the chaos of a battlefield without actually killing your own soldiers in practice, you invent a sport like oglak tartışış.
More commonly known as Buzkashi, or goat pulling.
Right, and the mechanics here are incredibly visceral.
Visceral is the perfect word for it.
You have this dusty, open field with 40 to 60 riders, and in the center is a headless goat carcass weighing about 10 to 12 kilograms.
So roughly 20 to 25 pounds of dead weight.
Yeah. And the objective is to ride into the crush, lean way down from the saddle, snatch that heavy carcass off the dirt, pin it under your leg, and ride clear. All while 50 other riders are physically slamming their horses into yours, trying to wrench the goat away.
It's intense.
So I have to ask you about this, because reading the raw descriptions in our sources, this sounds like pure chaos. It reads like a high-speed riot. How is this classified as a structured cultural sport and not just a dangerous free-for-all?
I get that.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, you quickly realize this is a highly calculated military simulation.
Right.
To an outside observer, yes, it looks like a riot. But navigating that specific type of chaos is the entire objective. Consider the physical requirements. Leaning completely off your center of gravity to deadlift a 12-kilogram shifting weight from the ground while moving.
Right, that takes massive core strength.
And it directly mimics reaching down to pull a wounded comrade onto your saddle during a retreat, or securing heavy loot during a raid.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think of that.
Furthermore, it completely desensitizes the horse. A horse is naturally a flight animal, right?
Yeah, they spook easily.
Exactly. So by forcing it into this crushing scrum of 50 screaming men, flying whips, and physical impacts, you are training that mount to remain entirely calm and responsive in the exact center of an infantry battle.
Okay, that reframes it completely for me. It's essentially extreme stress inoculation for both the rider and the cavalry mount.
Exactly.
And the sources note this sport is actively evolving too. Like in some southern regions today, the traditional goal used to be throwing the goat into a specific host's yard, but that's been replaced.
Yeah, they've modernized the scoring, basically.
They erect these 3-meter-high suspended nets in the center of the field now. So a rider has to secure the carcass, fight their way through the scrum, balance the 12-kilogram weight, and then heave it upward into a net while on a moving horse.
It adds an entirely new vertical dimension to the required strength.
Yeah.
I mean, you are combining the raw, blunt force trauma of a rugby scrum with the precision targeting of basketball, while managing an animal.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you look at the mechanics of Oglak, maneuvering horses in a tight group to secure a single object, it sounds remarkably similar to a sport we currently associate with British royalty and manicured lawns.
Yes.
But these exact same nomadic steppe riders actually invented one of the most elite, refined gentlemen's sports in the world.
We are talking about polo.
Polo.
Right. And while the word polo itself actually comes from a Tibetan word for ball, the original Turkic and Uyghur name for the sport is Chovgan, or degnek. The whole narrative that polo is inherently British is just a modern historical blind spot. It was born on the Central Asian steppes.
And the archaeological evidence for this is undeniable. In 1970, during excavations of the Astana tombs in Turpan, which date back to between the 5th and 7th centuries, archaeologists uncovered this incredible 37-centimeter painted clay figure.
A literal smoking gun for sports historians.
Yeah. It depicts a man with a mustache, wearing a traditional hat, and a short coat designed for mobility. He is sitting astride a white horse, holding a distinctly curved wooden stick, and he's intensely focusing downward at a ball. It is a 1,500-year-old perfect snapshot of a polo player.
And we know they weren't just batting a ball around the open steppe casually either. Archaeologists also uncovered an ancient playing field in Tashkurgan.
And the dimensions are fascinating. It's 150 meters long, but only 6 meters wide.
Which is incredibly narrow for horses.
6 meters wide. That's barely any room to turn around.
Exactly. It forces the play. A long, narrow field prevents those wide, sweeping lateral maneuvers. Instead, it forces the riders into high-speed, linear sprints and immediate head-on confrontations.
Which heavily mimics a cavalry charge.
Precisely. The field also featured 3-meter-high solid walls, specifically constructed to safely house spectators.
So people were turning out in droves to watch this.
Yeah, this indicates a highly formalized, spectator-driven sporting event.
And it was culturally mandated for the elite, too. By the 11th century, the scholar Yusuf Kaz Hajib wrote the Kutadgu Bilig, which is basically a foundational text of the era.
A very important cultural document.
He explicitly lists playing Chovgan as a strict requirement for anyone wishing to be considered a refined gentleman. Why? Because unlike the raw, brute force of goat pulling, polo required strategic foresight. It required organized teamwork and immense self-discipline.
It was the physical manifestation of being a good statesman.
Exactly. They even engineered the equipment specifically for the terrain. The balls weren't carved wood. They were constructed by tightly wrapping animal hair or soft fabric in leather.
And that material choice is vital.
Why is that?
Well, a solid wooden ball would shatter against the mallet, or it would bounce unpredictably on hard-packed dirt. But by wrapping hair tightly in leather, they created a ball that absorbed the kinetic impact of the mallet while maintaining a consistent, predictable weight and density.
The journey of this sport is just staggering to me. It originates with nomads on the steppe, it travels south into India with Emperor Babur, and it thrives there until around 1859.
Right, the colonial era.
Yeah, that's when British tea planters observe it, adopt it, and basically export it back to Europe, where it gets rebranded as the sport of kings. But in that transition, the original, highly ritualized, nomadic culture of the game was totally erased.
Just such a loss.
The ancient Uyghurs, they had referees stationed at the boundaries, wielding flags that represented the sun and the moon. They introduced this rich cosmic symbolism to the rules. They initiated every match with a massive acoustic ceremony featuring the sine, which is this piercing traditional oboe alongside heavy nagar drums.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a game, it was a complete sensory and cultural ritual.
It was a reflection of their entire cosmology, essentially played out on a 150-meter field.
So we've explored how they raced, how they pressure tested their warriors, and how they formalized their strategies, all completely tethered to the horse. But our sources detail one final piece of engineering that answers a very specific question. How do a people whose entire psychology is built on high-speed mounted combat experience that thrill when the horse needs to rest?
They engineer a way to simulate flight.
Yes.
They built an extreme aerial sport called sargadi or chapelek, which translates to the swing ride.
And the engineering behind this is both brilliant and, frankly, absolutely terrifying. They would take a massive timber pole ranging from 8 to 20 meters high.
We are talking up to 60 feet in the air.
60 feet. And they'd sink it deep into the earth. On the apex of this pole, they mounted a large horizontal cartwheel. And hanging down from the outer rim of that wheel were thick ropes terminating in iron rings.
The mechanics are remarkably sophisticated for the era.
Tell us how it worked.
So, the riders would place one leg securely into the lower loop of the ring and grip the rope above them. At the base of the central pole, a team would begin pushing attached horizontal beams, rotating the entire structure.
Like a massive human-powered engine.
Exactly. As the central pole spun, the wheel at the top rotated faster and faster. And then, physics takes over. The riders gripping the ropes are lifted from the ground, and as the velocity increases, they're launched completely horizontally into the air, flying in a massive 60-foot-high orbit around the central axis.
So what does this all mean? I mean, think about the subterranean foundation and counterbalance required to safely support the sheer centrifugal force of multiple adult humans spinning horizontally at 60 feet in the air.
It's incredible engineering.
This is an ancient society building a functional, high-speed centrifuge out of greased timber, iron, and rope. But they weren't just doing it to scream and enjoy the view.
No, of course not. They had to make it a martial exercise.
Right. While orbiting horizontally at top speed, the riders would let go of the ropes with one hand and simulate horseback archery. They would draw a bow and track targets while moving.
Which is mathematically and physically far more difficult than shooting from a galloping horse.
How so?
On a horse, you are generally moving in a linear path. But on the swing ride, you are moving in a continuous curve, meaning your spatial relationship to a static target is constantly changing at a high velocity. It trained their archers to maintain extreme aerial stability and track targets through incredibly complex trajectories.
It also required absolute fearlessness. The term sargadi literally translates to turned yellow.
Yeah, that wasn't a metaphor.
No. The intense G-forces, the rapid blood displacement, and the sheer adrenaline of orbiting at that height would literally cause the riders' faces to drain of blood and turn a pale yellow.
The cultural origins of the ride are equally compelling, actually. The 11th century scholar Al-Biruni documented that this contraption was inspired by an ancient myth regarding a king named Jamshid.
Oh, right, the Flying King.
Yeah. According to the lore, Jamshi possessed a magical cart that granted him the ability to fly. The swing ride was basically an engineered attempt to physically recreate that mythological sensation of flight for the common person.
And our source text draws a brilliant, direct parallel to modern engineering here. Because if you visit almost any major amusement park today, you will find the exact modern equivalent.
The swing ride.
The swing ride, where suspended chairs fan outward as the central tower spins. The official modern iteration was patented in California around 1908, and the German manufacturer Zierer popularized the massive theme park versions in 1972. Yet, here were the nomadic people of the steppes, perfectly harnessing these physics to simulate flight and train their warriors centuries before the concept of an amusement park even existed.
This raises an important question.
What's that?
When we analyze this entire spectrum,
Yeah.
the relentless breeding of the Argun horses, the violent crush of Buzkashi, the strategic refinement of Polo, and the engineered terror of the swing ride, what does it reveal about human nature?
That's a deep question.
We possess this inherent drive to take our most brutal life-or-death survival skills, riding massive beasts into warfare, shooting projectiles to secure food, and we actively transform them into play. We take the very things that threaten our survival, we master them, and then we convert that mastery into joy and amusement. It is a universal psychological mechanism for conquering fear.
That is so true. We really have mapped out an incredible timeline today. We started with the biological engineering of the rugged Arganu horses, built to endure the freezing steppes for honor and survival. We unpacked the visceral, tactical combat simulation of goat pulling in the dust.
Yeah, the Buzkashi.
We tracked the true nomadic origins of polo, shifting it from a vital statesman's discipline to a global phenomenon. And finally, we looked at ancient wooden centrifuges that predate modern thrill rides by centuries. This deep dive has highlighted an incredible intersection of ancient engineering, cultural resilience, and the sheer human desire for speed.
It serves as a potent reminder that our sports and our games are never merely distractions. They are a living, breathing archive of a culture's history, their environment, and the exact mechanics of their survival.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If our ancient ancestors took their daily, grueling, life-or-death survival skills managing war horses and shooting arrows at full gallop, and eventually engineered them into structured sports and literal amusement park rides, what mundane, everyday survival skills of our modern era are destined to become extreme sports 1,000 years from now?
Oh, that's hilarious to think about.
Right. Are the teenagers of the year 3000 going to strap into a high-speed centrifuge that perfectly simulates the heart-stopping physiological terror of accidentally hitting reply all on a sensitive company email? Will there be an extreme inbox zero theme park ride designed purely for the adrenaline rush?
I suppose if the simulation spins fast enough, it will turn them yellow, too.
We can only hope. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning the history behind the things you play, and we'll see you next time.
So I want you to imagine for a second that you are hanging completely upside down by one leg.
Oh, boy.
Right? You are 50 feet in the air, just dangling from this thick rope attached to a massive wooden wheel.
And there's absolutely no safety net here.
None. Zero. Below you, there's this team of men violently pushing a crossbar, and they're spinning this entire contraption faster and faster.
Wow.
You have no safety harness. You're dealing with, like, intense centrifugal force, extreme vertigo, and all the blood is just rushing straight to your head.
Sounds awful.
It does. But you are doing this on purpose. You're doing it just to train your body for the physical sensation of turning backward on a galloping horse to shoot an arrow.
It is, I mean, it's a terrifying visual.
Yeah.
But for the ancient nomadic warriors of the Central Asian steppes, that wasn't a nightmare. That was just practice.
Exactly. When you think about survival in the ancient world, you usually picture, I don't know, grim, brutal efficiency. Right. But today, we're taking a deep dive into an incredible stack of translated historical texts. These sources detail the ancient, traditional, equestrian, and extreme sports of the Uyghur people.
And we are talking about a massive geographic footprint here.
Oh, huge. Stretching from the shores of Lake Baikal all the way down to the Irtysh River. And the mission for this deep dive is to explore how these people took absolute raw survival skills.
The exact skills you need to, not die in a cavalry charge.
Yeah, or starve in the winter. And how they engineered those skills into highly sophisticated adrenaline pumping and honestly incredibly dangerous sports.
It's a phenomenal transition to witness in the historical record, because for nomadic cultures in this region, the horse was never just a beast of burden.
Right.
In the text, it is quite literally referred to as the wings of a man. We're going to explore how the grim necessities of warfare and hunting birthed games that eventually conquered the globe.
Like literally traveled the world.
Exactly. We're talking about the true origins of a very famous British high society pastime, and even the mechanical blueprint for a staple ride you'd find at a modern amusement park today.
And we want to uncover the brilliant engineering behind all of this, and see what it tells us about human courage and ingenuity. Because to play any kind of game on horseback, first, you have to completely master the animal.
You do.
And they didn't just tame horses, they actually biologically engineered them.
That's a great way to put it.
When you read the accounts from the Tang Dynasty poet Bai Jui, or the Sui Dynasty poet Yuan Zhen, they write with this sheer awe about Uyghur horse breeding. These ancient breeders actively created a hybrid superhorse.
Right, the Argoon.
Yes, the Argoon.
Which is just a fascinating piece of ancient genetics. The Argoon was a deliberate crossbreed between a fully wild stallion and a domestic mare, bred specifically for high-performance racing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that sounds incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
How do you even manage a completely wild stallion in a breeding scenario without, getting killed?
Very carefully, and with a deep, intuitive understanding of animal behavior. See, a wild stallion gives you raw, explosive power,
Right.
supreme endurance, and that untamed survival instinct. But you can't ride a purely wild animal in a structured race. It's just too unpredictable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the domestic mare provides the crucial baseline of docility and trainability. They were effectively trying to capture lightning in a bottle.
Wow.
They needed the fire of the wild steppe, but they needed it to respond to the absolute slightest shift of a rider's weight.
To me, it's essentially early Formula One engineering. You aren't just taking what nature gave you. You're in the garage tweaking the biological engine for pure performance.
That is a perfect analogy.
You're building a highly responsive machine for the track.
And the track itself was highly varied. The historical records detail two main types of ancient races, broadly known as atbegisi.
Right.
You had your long-distance endurance racing across the steppes, which is basically your off-road rally racing. But what's truly unique in the sources is their focus on the ambling or pacing races. These weren't flat-out chaotic gallops. They were highly technical events held on flat roads or incredibly on solid winter ice.
See, racing horses on a sheet of winter ice sounds like a guaranteed way to break a horse's leg.
It really does.
How is that even physically possible?
Well, it comes down to the biomechanics of the amble. Ambling is a very specific lateral two-beat gait.
Okay.
Instead of a standard diagonal trot where the horse's legs move in a way that makes the rider bounce up and down.
Right, like standard horseback riding.
Exactly. Instead of that, an ambling horse moves the front and back legs on the exact same side of its body forward at the same time.
Wait, the same side?
Yes, and then it shifts to the two legs on the other side.
Oh, wow. So the horse is almost gliding side to side rather than bouncing up and down?
Precisely. The center of gravity stays remarkably level. Because the weight distribution is so incredibly smooth and controlled, the horse can maintain traction on highly slippery surfaces, like ice.
That is wild.
And the criteria for winning these races is what elevates this from a survival skill to a true art form. The horses were decorated with intricate bells made of brass or bronze.
Oh, nice.
And the winner wasn't necessarily just the first one across the finish line.
Ooh.
Nope. The winner was the horse whose lateral gait was so flawlessly smooth, so perfectly rhythmic, that the bells created a beautiful, continuous dancing melody.
No way.
Yeah. If a horse breaks its stride or panics and slips, the bells clang chaotically. But an ambling horse, moving with perfect biomechanical symmetry, literally creates music.
I mean, think about that for a second. Imagine the unbelievable physical control required from both the rider and the animal to make a massive 1,000-pound beast essentially dance across a frozen lake without slipping.
It's incredible.
All while keeping perfect musical time. It's like turning a biological tank into a figure skater. It perfectly highlights how these ancient people took a brutal utilitarian survival tool and elevated it into high aesthetic art. And the craziest part is that this isn't just locked in the past. The sources note that in the 1990s, a Uyghur woman named Paride Abdurrahman won double gold medals in these exact ambling events in China.
That's amazing.
And she did it without any modern professional trainers. She used raw, inherited cultural knowledge, proving that this deep biomechanical understanding of the horse is still very much alive today.
It is a remarkable legacy, but if we connect this to the bigger picture of their society, a fascinating paradox emerges.
Yeah.
The ambling race was all about elegance, rhythm, and supreme control during times of peace,
Right.
but these were nomadic people who lived in a very dangerous, highly contested world. So if ambling is the ballet...
And you trained for the mosh pit.
Exactly. Yeah. How do you prepare for the brutal, unpredictable, swirling chaos of a cavalry battle?
Right. You need a way to simulate war. And that brings us to something in the text called Oglak Tartashish.
Goat pulling?
Goat pulling. I want to paint a visceral picture for you of what this actually looked like. You have a massive group of heavily mounted riders. They are all fighting over a decapitated goat carcass.
And this isn't a light object.
No. A mature goat carcass weighs between 40 to 60 kilograms. That is upwards of 130 pounds of dead, awkward weight.
Oh.
The goal is to reach down from your saddle, secure this incredibly heavy mass under your thigh, and ride it to the finish line while hundreds of other riders try to physically rip it away from you.
It is the absolute definition of controlled chaos. Picture the blinding dust, the roar of hundreds of galloping hooves, the sheer physical exertion of leaning out of your saddle to deadlift 130 pounds from the ground while your horse is moving at 30 miles an hour.
It's insane.
But what's fascinating here is the brilliant twist. If you look closely at the rules governing this sport, it wasn't a free-for-all brawl. Despite the extreme physical violence of the objective, there was a remarkably strict code of conduct. You cannot whip other players, you cannot intentionally scare another rider's horse, and you absolutely cannot knock people down.
See, I have to push back on this because the physics of that just do not compute for me.
Fair enough.
You have a swirling vortex of massive animals, guys wrestling over a 60-kilogram goat. Everyone is moving at maximum speed. Adrenaline is off the charts.
Yeah.
How do you possibly enforce a rule like no knocking people down? It sounds like trying to play a game of full-contact rugby but telling everyone they aren't allowed to scuff anyone's shoes.
It sounds impossible to a modern observer, I know, but that restraint was the entire point of the exercise.
How so?
It was a rigorous, high-stakes test of martial discipline. Think about a real cavalry charge on a battlefield.
Okay.
If you lose spatial awareness, if you lose control of your horse and crash into your own ranks, you jeopardize the entire army. A domino effect in a cavalry line is fatal.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about that.
So Oglak was designed to teach absolute supreme control under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It trained a rider to be hyper-aware of the exact physical space their horse occupied, even while their attention was entirely focused on wrestling a heavy object away from an opponent.
Ah, okay. So the restraint itself is the actual skill being tested. The goat is just a distraction to see if you can maintain your formation.
Precisely. You are proving that you master the horse, not the other way around. And this wasn't just a military drill, right? It wove deeply into the social fabric.
How did that work?
Well, the winner who successfully secured the goat wouldn't just cross an arbitrary finish line. They would ride to a specific courtyard in the community and throw the goat inside.
Oh, that's interesting.
The family who owned that courtyard was then given the honor and the financial responsibility of hosting the next game. So the sport literally cycled through the community, binding different families and clans together through shared risk and shared hospitality.
And that intense generational training produced military results that literally terrified the ancient world.
Oh, absolutely.
There are records from the 11th century scholar Mahmud al-Kashgari describing an encounter where 4,000 Uyghur archers faced down the army of Alexander the Great.
Right.
Kashgari notes these warriors wore distinct falcon feather hats, and they completely broke the morale of the opposing empire. Because of the spatial awareness and core strength they built from games like goat pulling, they could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy, not just forward, but backward.
Over their shoulders.
Yeah, over their shoulders, while riding away at a full gallop.
From a tactical standpoint, it just breaks the brain of a traditional infantry army.
Yeah.
How do you fight an enemy that attacks you with lethal precision while they are simultaneously retreating? You can't catch them, and you can't hide from them.
It's a devastating combination of speed, riding intensity, and extreme pinpoint precision. And that specific blend of skills leads us directly to a sport that most listeners probably associate with British high society.
Or fancy country clubs with manicured lawns.
Exactly. But its true roots are buried deep in the dirt of the Central Asian steppes. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, let's hear it.
We were talking about the game of Chovgan, also known as Degnek,
Right.
which the world today knows as Polo.
And the archaeological evidence for this in the sources is absolutely staggering.
Tell me about the tombs.
Right, so in the ancient Astana tombs of Turpan, which date back to the 5th to 7th centuries, archaeologists uncovered a 37-centimeter painted clay figure.
Okay.
It is an undeniable, perfectly preserved snapshot of ancient Polo. It depicts a rider with a mustache sitting on a white horse. His eyes are locked dead on a ball on the ground, and in his right hand he is holding a curved wooden stick.
It's literally a polo player frozen in clay over a millennium ago.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this wasn't just a casual pastime played by a few guys in an open field to kill an afternoon.
No.
This was an ancient sporting industry of massive proportions.
Just massive.
Archaeologists have actually uncovered an ancient stadium in Tashkurgan specifically built for this sport. The dimensions are incredible. The field is 150 meters long, flanked by raised earthen viewing areas for spectators that were built 6 meters high.
Think about what that does to your perception of ancient history. A stadium longer than a modern football field, with 20-foot-high bleachers.
It's wild.
They were hosting the equivalent of Super Bowl Sundays. You can just imagine the scale of the ancient tailgate party.
Right.
And it wasn't just the architecture. The ancient dictionaries actually record the specific terminology for the massive betting culture that surrounded these matches.
Wow, yeah.
People were in the stands wagering livestock, huge sums of money, probably their own horses. It was a highly organized, deeply ingrained, spectator-driven phenomenon.
And it required an entirely different approach to horse engineering, too.
How so?
Well, we talked about ambling races, where you want a steady lateral rhythm. We talked about olak, where you need pure, unyielding strength to push through a crowd with a 60-kilogram goat.
Right.
But for Chovgan, or polo, you needed a horse that could sprint, stop on a dime, pivot 180 degrees, and instantly accelerate again, all while tracking a small wooden ball. It's about explosive agility and lateral quickness rather than pure speed or bulk.
It's like switching from a heavy-duty pickup truck to a lightweight sports car.
Precisely. And the timeline of how this sports car traveled is fascinating.
Yeah, track this for us.
It originates with the Uyghur and other steppe empires, then travels through Persia and the Arab world, where it gets picked up by Islamic courts. It enters India via Emperor Babur and the establishment of the Mughal Empire.
Okay.
And it sits there, evolving until the 1850s. That is when British tea planters stationed in India see it being played, become completely obsessed with it, and eventually form the first Western polo club in 1859.
From a rugged, high-speed cavalry training exercise on the dusty steppes to a sport played by British royals in tailored shirts.
It's a wild trajectory.
It really is. But so far, we've talked a lot about speed. We've talked about brute strength, and we've talked about pinpoint precision on horseback. There is one more sport in these texts we have to discuss, because it fundamentally changes how we think about ancient training.
I know where you're going with this.
If you are a nomadic warrior, how do you train for the feeling of flying through the air on a horse when you can't actually use a horse?
Yes. You are talking about the aerospace engineering of the ancient steppes.
Exactly. This is the hook we started the show with. It is called sargati, which is also known as shaklek, or the circle swing. Let me break down the actual mechanics of this setup for you.
Please do.
You take a massive 20-meter-tall wooden pole that is over 60 feet high, roughly the height of a 6-story building. You plant it incredibly firmly in the ground. On the very top of this mast, you mount a large wooden wheel horizontally. Hanging down from the edges of that wheel are long, thick ropes made of animal hide or woven fiber. Down at the bottom of the pole, attached to the central axis, is a crossbar. Strong men push this crossbar, walking in a circle, spinning the entire 60-foot contraption.
And as they push faster and faster,
The centrifugal force flings the ropes outward and upward, and there are athletes attached to the ends of those ropes, getting thrown high into the sky in a massive arc.
And we really must emphasize the sheer bravery involved here. There are absolutely no safety harnesses, no carabiners, no foam pits. This is raw timber, thick rope, gravity, and a very real chance of dying if your grip fails.
Which makes the older, more traditional version of this even more insane, because the athletes wouldn't just sit in a little swing chair. They would take the loop at the end of the rope and hook just one leg into it.
Oh my goodness.
As the machine spun up to maximum speed, flinging them outward, they would hang completely upside down, 40 or 50 feet in the air, hands entirely free.
It's unbelievable.
Why would anyone do this? to mimic the exact physical sensation of hanging off the side of a galloping horse while shooting arrows backward. They were systematically training their bodies and their inner ears to handle severe vertigo, disorientation, and extreme G-forces.
Right.
And the name of the sport perfectly captures the reality of it. The crowd watching the spectacle would yell, "Sargati,"
which translates literally to turns yellow or turns pale.
Yes, because between the high altitude, the aggressive spinning, and the sheer terror of hanging by one leg, the blood would literally drain from the athletes' faces. They would step off the ride looking completely pale, yellow, and out of breath. It was the ultimate public test of courage.
But this raises an important question from an engineering standpoint. How did ancient people who did not have computer modeling, stress test software, or modern physics textbooks understand the complex geometry required to build a 20-meter centrifuge safely?
Right, because if you have a 60-foot pole and you put unbalanced, heavy human weight flying around the top of it, that pole is going to snap like a twig and kill everyone in the blast radius.
Yeah. Exactly. They had to intuitively calculate load-bearing weights, the deep foundation needed to anchor the mast, the tensile strength of the ropes, and the exact stability of the central axis to prevent a catastrophic failure.
Just genius.
It was a masterpiece of structural engineering achieved through deep observation and high-stakes trial and error. And there is a direct mechanical line from this ancient test of bravery to our modern world.
Oh.
In 1908, in California and Germany, the first wave swinger amusement park rides were invented.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's that classic iconic ride you see at every state fair today, the spinning top that flings the little swing chairs outward.
I know exactly the one.
The mechanical and physical principles are completely identical. But the ancient Uyghurs built the prototype centuries earlier, purely with timber, cordage, and a desire to conquer the sky.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this today? Whether you are an adrenaline junkie who loves extreme sports or someone who prefers to keep both feet firmly planted on solid ground, this history proves something fundamental about human nature.
Scott?
We have always craved a mixture of play, danger, and pushing the absolute limits of physics. We take the brutal, utilitarian things that keep us alive, and we engineer them into art, and then we turn them into a thrill.
It shows us that sports are never just games meant to pass the time. To look at a culture's sports is to walk through a living, breathing museum of its history.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
For these nomadic people, their games were finely tuned survival tools. They built communal bonds, they honed vital military and hunting skills, and they expressed an indomitable spirit. They refused to just survive in a harsh, unforgiving landscape. They wanted to master it, and they wanted to do it beautifully.
Which leaves me with a final thought I want you to mull over. We've seen how ancient Central Asian sports, like wrestling a 130-pound goat at 30 miles an hour or hanging upside down from a 60-foot centrifuge, were explicitly designed to train people for the physical survival demands of their specific era.
Right.
So what will historians 1,000 years from now deduce about our current society?
Oh, that's a good question.
When they look back at the sports we obsess over today, whether that is the hyper-fast twitch reflexes and screen processing of esports, or the concrete urban navigation of parkour, what exact modern survival skills are we unknowingly training ourselves for right now? Because remember, survival tools aren't just for staying alive. Sometimes survival itself is the art.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine a 40-kilogram goat carcass just, dropped into the center of the vast, unforgiving Central Asian steppe.
Right, just absolute chaos waiting to happen.
Exactly. Around it, you have this thundering mass of hundreds of horses and riders crashing into one another, completely unrestrained by any sort of modern safety rules, fighting to pull that heavy prize from the dirt while galloping at full speed. I mean, this is the raw origin of traditional Uyghur equestrian sports.
It really is. And today, we're digging into the history, the evolution, and the modern legacy of these practices, going from the brutal mechanics of goat pulling to the high-altitude aerial swing game known as Sargati.
Yeah, and our central focus today is on a really fascinating transformation detailed in our historical source material. Because, as these ancient practices intersected with the modern world, whether we're talking about the global popularization of polo or the engineering of modern amusement rides, the question is, does this evolution represent a triumphant globalization and endurance of Uyghur cultural ingenuity?
Right. Or conversely, Does it represent a tragic dilution of its original, fearless equestrian soul? Because based strictly on the provided historical text on Uyghur traditional equestrian culture, my position is that the modern iterations, stripped of their inherent danger, their martial utility, and that connection to the horse, represent a profound loss of the culture's authentic spirit.
And I will be arguing the exact opposite. I think the modernization and global spread of these sports demonstrates the undeniable resilience and really the intellectual triumph of Uyghur culture. It's a masterclass in cultural endurance and adaptation.
A masterclass? I mean, I guess we'll see about that.
Think about the sheer engineering genius and athletic innovation of the ancient Uyghurs. They went way beyond just survival. They created the foundations of Chovgan, which we know as Polo. They engineered the 20-meter-high Sargaidi swing. These inventions spread via the Silk Road, influenced the Tang and Song dynasties, India, and eventually 19th century Europe, adapting from survival mechanisms to codified sports and even modern amusement concepts. It just proves the timelessness of Uyghur ingenuity.
Well, the core essence of these sports has been tragically sterilized, though. Ancient Uyghur equestrian culture was fundamentally rooted in this concept called kahramanlık, which translates to this absolute unyielding fearlessness.
Right. Inspired by the legendary warrior Afrasiab.
Exactly. So when Chovgan becomes a leisure sport for European elites, or when the terrifying, unharnessed Sargaidi swing is replaced by, a modern theme park ride with safety belts, the soul of the practice just dies. Without the sheer danger, the horse, and the steps, the modern remnants are just hollow echoes of a once powerful culture.
Well, let's start with segment 1, looking at the global journey of Chovgan, or Polo. Is it triumph or appropriation? Because the historical evidence of Uyghur invention and export in the text is just staggering.
It is, well documented, yeah.
Right, look at the 5th to 7th century clay figure of polo player they found in the Astana Cemetery in Turpan. It's not just a guy on a horse. The figure has a short jacket, riding boots, and a highly specific polo stick. That proves incredibly early codification.
It shows they had uniforms, sure.
It shows formalization. And I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That codification is exactly what allowed the sport's journey from Central Asia to India via Babur and eventually to those British tea planters in 1859. It shows the cultural power of the Uyghurs to shape global leisure.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You have to look at the original purpose of Chovgan. It wasn't about leisure at all. It was a strict military training exercise to teach cavalry skills.
But that doesn't mean it can't evolve.
Wait, let me finish the point on mechanics. The text notes that this demanded horses capable of sudden, explosive stops in speed. You're swinging a heavy wooden mallet, the degnek, which is basically training for swinging a mace in combat. When you translate a martial survival tool into an aristocratic pastime, you fundamentally sever the sport from its utilitarian and spiritual roots on the steppe.
I hear you, but it's like translating a classic novel. The original language might be lost, but the core narrative reaches millions. Isn't survival through adaptation better than obscurity?
I wouldn't call turning a warrior's crucible into a garden party a survival of the narrative.
But it didn't just survive in Europe. The text highlights that Mahmud Akashgari and Yusuf Khas Hajib both documented it in their literary works, right? They cemented its literary and cultural permanence long before the British got involved. It became an intellectual pursuit, not just a martial one.
Yes, it was documented, but if you want to talk about the true spirit of the horse and what happens when you strip that martial context away, we have to look at the sports that didn't globalize in the same way, like Otbe Gacy and Oglak Tartishis.
The goat pulling?
Right. The text details the intense rules or lack thereof in Oglak Tartishish. You have riders dropping their reins, leaning completely out of the saddle to grab a 40-kilogram goat at full gallop. They have to completely trust the horse to navigate the scrum autonomously. You can't replicate that bond on a manicured polo field.
No, it's definitely a different scale of intensity.
And look at the historical Begisi races. You're talking about 100 to 300 horses charging across the plains at once. That's the raw nature of the culture. And the modern world just doesn't know what to do with that authentic, organic bond.
Look at the tragedy of modern Uyghur equestrian Frida Abdulrahman.
Oh, right, the champion from the 90s.
Yes, she went double gold in the 1993 National Games. She broke Asian records in 1998 for rhythmic walking the yorga. But she eventually had to step back. Why? Because she lacked a dedicated coach and economic support. The modern, standardized sporting economy couldn't accommodate her organic, traditional talent.
I mean, I definitely acknowledge the tragedy of Frida Abdulrahman's situation. It's a failure of institutional support. But let's actually look at the yorga itself, the rhythmic walking races you just mentioned.
Okay.
Because the yorga actually proves my point about cultural refinement. It wasn't all just sheer speed and violence and 300 horses charging. The yorga is highly artistic. The text describes horses decorated with bells, trained to move in a delicate, dance-like lateral rhythm on winter ice.
It is incredibly difficult to train, yes.
Exactly. They used the jingling of the brass bells to maintain the cadence. That shows the culture didn't just value raw martial power. They valued high aesthetic beauty and art. That's intellectual evolution.
It's an evolution, sure, but one that is crushed by the modern framework, as Farida's story shows.
Well, if we're talking about intellectual evolution and modern frameworks, we have to pivot to the aerial danger of Sargadi versus the modern theme park.
Ah, the Chak Bilig, the swing.
Yes, this is where the engineering genius really shines. You have this massive wooden wheel set on a 10 to 20 meter pole. The geometric and structural genius required for ancient people to engineer a centrifugal swing is just astounding.
It is an impressive piece of engineering, I'll give you that.
And the text draws a direct line. The 1908 and 1972 Zir wave swingers, the swing rides you see at every amusement park, they share the exact structural DNA of the Sargadi. It proves that Uyghur ancestral intellect literally anticipated modern physics and entertainment.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered the actual physiological experience of ancient Sargadi?
What do you mean? The centrifugal force?
I mean, the sheer terror. They didn't have automatic locking seats. Players hung from ropes without safety belts. And they weren't just sitting there. They were mimicking the actions of horseback archers, shooting forward and backward while spinning.
Like the archers who fought Alexander the Great?
Precisely. The text compares it to the 4,000 Uyghur archers who amazed Alexander the Great by shooting backward over their horses. On the Sargadi, they spun so fast their faces literally turned pale. That's where the name comes from. Sargadi means it turns yellow.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous.
It was supposed to be. Equating Sargadi to a modern amusement ride is like taking a wild wolf and breeding it into a domesticated lapdog. Strapping 64 people into automatic seats with safety belts completely destroys the traditional requirement of extreme bravery and risk-taking. The karamlik is totally gone.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because holding on to 5th century danger isn't practical. You can't expect a modern society to keep dropping teenagers from 20-meter poles just to prove they're still brave.
That without the danger, it's just a ride. It's consumerism.
It's remembrance. The text points out that even today, in places like Madit and Amawait counties, the tradition survives during holidays. They still build the poles, they still swing. It proves the culture still values the ritual of remembering their ancestors' flight, even if the context has safely shifted for the modern era.
But the context was the whole point. By making it safe, you fundamentally alter the psychology of the participant. They are no longer communicating with the unforgiving spirits of the steppe.
Well, I think we have to zoom out here as we wrap up. From my perspective, based on the text, the presence of Polo on global fields, and the mechanical echoes of Sargadi in modern engineering are just massive testaments to an indestructible Uyghur cultural legacy. They successfully evolved beyond the steppe.
And to summarize my view, I still maintain that the true soul of these practices existed purely in their danger, their martial utility, and their deep bond with the horse. Modernization hasn't preserved them. It has resulted in a sterilized shadow of a once fearless era.
It's a profound tension, isn't it? The struggle between preserving authentic heritage and adapting to a modern world. It's a complex reality that's evident throughout the source material we've discussed today.
It really is. And I think there's immense value in studying these ancient practices to understand human ingenuity. The text clearly holds even more layers regarding how geography and history shape human movement and culture.
Absolutely. Whether adaptation is a victory or a loss is something our listeners will have to weigh for themselves. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.